Welcome to Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. Thank you very much for joining us today. I promise I'll be quick with my introductions because I know you all want to hear the interview. And our guest today is Bill Hatcher, author of The Red Planet, among many other books. The Red Planet is his book that we published in 2024, and he talks about the gender landscapes theory. Have you heard of it? I haven't before I read this book. And then we discussed a lot about it with Bill in this episode. So I think it's important for you to know that the gender landscapes theory seeks to explain how humans evolved from vegan, collaborative, and matriarchal societies to meat-eaters, competitive, and patriarchal ones. His background, Bill's background in geography and anthropology, helps him understand these intersections under a very unique perspective. This is a very nice episode. I couldn't hold back at some point because some of my academic interests intersects with Bill's academic interests, so we got to talk a little bit about both of our experiences in this field. And I wouldn't miss the opportunity of bouncing back and forth with him with some of the ideas that I wrote about back when I was doing my master's degree. So I hope you're also interested. I think if you tune into this episode, you're definitely interested in this topic. And if after the episode you decide you must read the entire book, you just must, then head over to lanternpm.org, click on ebooks, and look for The Red Planet. Make sure to add the special discount coupon that we're going to give it to you at the end of this episode so you can stay until the very end with us here. And you will get 25% off as a thank you for being a Lantern Voices listener. So as promised, I'm not going to extend myself here. Come with us. Let's get started. Welcome to Lantern Voices.
Hey, Louisa, great to be here.
How are you doing today so far?
Doing great. Got a little snow on the ground here in Colorado, but looks like it's trying to clear off now too.
That's great. Great. I heard that the East Coast is bracing themselves for a very heavy storm this weekend. So
Yeah, much more out there for sure.
by the time our listeners get to this episode, springtime will be getting to them. So it will be happier times indeed.
Yeah.
Before we get started with our questions, I wanted to ask you if you can tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. You're a geographer and anthropologist. How did you end up studying these fields and how they sparked your interest in understanding different forms of oppression?
Oh gosh. Great question. So I grew up in the Midwest, in Southern Illinois, and kind of in my own little bubble world in rural Illinois. And I don't know, I was just always curious about the rest of the world. We lived close to the Mississippi River. And so, I wondered, where did it come from? Where did it go? And this big river with all of these barges, of grains and oil and different things that they were carrying up and down the river. So I think that kind of sparked my interest for sure. Also, I grew up in a traditional setting. My father was a pipe fitter welder. Mom was the traditional homemaker. And so it was a very, very traditional, well, to use a word, patriarchal upbringing. And that's what I grew up in. We did a lot of hunting and fishing growing up. That's kind of, where my identity came from, watching my dad, and that's where his identity came from. And I saw certainly how that was connected to other things in my world, like we were men, and men did these things. We were better than women, and and I'm sure glad I wasn't a girl growing up. And we went hunting. We did all of these manly things at the time. And as I grew older, then my dad left us when I was in my teens. It was both kind of a curse and a blessing. It allowed me the space in those critical years there in my early mid-teens to begin to think about, well, what's real in the world? Because this isn't supposed to happen. And it wasn't in my worldview at all. And so I began to explore why things are the way they are, and what do I really think? What do I want to do? Um, I was first generation college person, college graduate in my family, and in college I was also challenged to think differently about the world around me. So there was that, and after college, I toward the end of college, had my first marriage. I was married to a young woman who was evangelical Christian, and so
Mhm.
I was trying, I think, to reform my own upbringing, try to repair it, and because I grew up in a very Christian world too, and when that marriage fell apart after only about 2 years, then it kind of exploded everything for me, and so wasn't sure what to believe and what was real, which way was up and down. So I joined the Peace Corps, spent a few years in Africa. This was after college. I had studied geography mostly, and I taught geography in an all-girls boarding school in Tanzania. Great adventures there for sure. Learning about different religions and different ways people think, different things people eat, and how most of the rest of the world lives. And it really exploded my former view of the world. So that really sent me in a different direction. I began to explore, well, first, religions, what's true, what's not. And I began to think about different belief systems. That to me was connected to how women were treated. And so gender, um, sexuality became a question that I was looking into. I also looked into at that time things that I was eating. Why do I eat these things? And I began to explore vegetarianism at that time,
Mhm.
kind of kind of dipping my toe into the vegetarian world. Mostly at first it was well, it's expensive. There's meat and dairy and eggs. They're, not cheap. And also some health issues that I was learning about that can spring from eating those. Later, I would learn how meat eating and dairy and eggs were related to subconsciously to oppression of women and oppression of the feminine more generally. So all of that was slowly coming in, leaking into my world in
Mhm.
those years. I worked for a number of years after Peace Corps for National Outdoor Leadership School, leading people into wilderness areas. Went back to Africa for a while, um, and met my wife actually on one of the courses I was teaching, and back in 2004, and then we actually settled here in Southern Colorado about 20 years ago. So, and I've been teaching at various colleges around the area
Yeah.
since that time.
Yeah, it's amazing how much traveling can impact our lives when we have the opportunity to do it and to not just go as tourists, but to actually immerse ourselves in other people's realities. It really helps change what we consider to be paradigms in our brains.
Mhm. Oh, for sure, yeah, and my wife and I have traveled some since then in the last 20 years. We continue to explore different places, so as we're able. So it's been a long learning experience, and along the way too. I've written now 3 books for Lantern
Hmm.
Publishing and Media. First one came out in 2012. But it's basically about the whole Peace Corps transformational journey, and then in 2018 was Principles of Flight, um, which is part memoir and part looking at the changes going on in the world around me regarding more um, uh, meat eating and warfare and how that's related to misogyny. And I began to tie these things together in Principles of Flight. Yeah.
Was that around the time where you started to develop the gender landscapes theory?
It was around that time began to put all the, nuts and bolts together in my mind and thinking, I see some things here. I'm teaching anthropology, I'm teaching geography, and I can begin to connect some dots and put a lot of the information I was learning from different social sciences and physical sciences together and see something emerging from that. And that's in the Red Planet here, my most recent book. Yeah.
And since this topic, the gender landscape theory, is so important and so central to the entire book, can you tell us a little bit of the definition of the GLT for folks who haven't read The Red Planet yet to entice them to read it?
So the gendered landscapes theory, and officially it's a hypothesis. Theory is more of a popular cultural term that I'm using just here. But the gendered landscapes theory, in brief, it shows how in early human history that geography helped to shape our minds, which in turn shaped human culture. Now, breaking it down a little bit, human cerebral mutations in our brains um, that occurred during the last ice age greatly expanded the human ego. And with that, I just want to mention that, of course, ego, neither good nor bad. It's unconscious. It's just a thing, but it certainly has certain effects. It's um, something that comes up here too. It's the ego perceived then our separateness from the natural world. It interpreted landscapes as distinct and separate entities then in terms of gender. So we were beginning to perceive our surroundings in terms of the way we were beginning to perceive ourselves.
Mhm.
Um, and then the masculine nature of some harsher landscapes, certain landscapes, encouraged us then to rely on corresponding masculine behaviors for survival. Okay, fine. Masculine behaviors. And finally, in certain critical instances, an emphasis on masculine behaviors would culminate in punitive gods and religions, patriarchal socioeconomic structures, uh, environmental devastation, barbarity committed against both humans and non-human animals, and these crushing social inequalities that would eventually emerge from that. Didn't have to be that way, but that's certainly the way we went
Mhm.
eventually. Right. So the gendered landscapes theory is basically saying that uh, the the structure of the mind changed based on a cognitive mutation around 60 or 70,000 years ago. Um, and then that allowed the content of the mind to change and to project our ego self outward and reinterpret the world in terms of archetypes. And then we shared that content, that change with other people and other populations around us, and that influenced culture. That basically grew complex human cultures that we would have later on have today. So that's kind of the gendered landscapes theory.
Right. From what I understood from your explanation right now and from the book, I'll try to give a practical example and you tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Okay.
Um, so that would mean that for civilizations that developed in harsher landscapes, either deserts where food was scarce and water access was scarce, or in the northern hemisphere continent where it's closer to the poles, where again food and water access is harsher because everything's frozen, would have developed traits that are more patriarchal, that are more masculine. On the other hand, civilizations that would develop close to the tropics, where there's food plenty, there's water plenty, the weather is not as tough for humans to bear, they would have developed more matriarchal and cooperative societies. Is that correct?
Broadly, yes. Yes. And it didn't have to be that way. I mean, certainly, masculine landscapes, which inspire more masculine behaviors, does not necessarily need to, spring patriarchies into existence. But in a few cases, yes, that's what happened in those environments, Louisa, that you're mentioning. Deserts or higher latitudes, toward the Arctic, what have you. Um, those have what's called, lower environmental quality. That is, uh, fewer foods for us to eat, and so it certainly inspires, well, more violence. Um, and those and it does inspire more, not only patriarchies, but more readily patrilinees, and patrilocalities. And that, of course, means that, name and wealth follow the father's side of the family in those places. It's much more common among foraging peoples, the few that still live there, in those higher latitudes. Carol Ember, an anthropologist from mostly from the late 20th, early 21st centuries, showed how that was a fact in those foraging populations there, and in areas closer to the equator where there's higher environmental quality. You have more matrilinees and matrilocalities. Wealth and family name follow the mother's side of the family. Husband and wife married, they stay with the mom's side of the family, and she tends to control the mom tends to control more of the decision making, the wealth in the family. So it's not 100% how it works across the board, but it certainly tends that way.
Hi there, I'm Hope Bohannick, host of the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. Join me on a journey to uncover the heartbreaking and heartwarming aspects of living vegan. My guests cover a variety of issues, but I like to focus on ethics, chickens and sanctuaries, the environment, anti-oppression activism, and the reasons for living vegan. If this sounds good to you, come check out the Hope for the Animals podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We've been talking about gender archetypes to explain landscapes and phenomena. What is the challenge of talking about gender archetypes without falling into the binary, which, as you put in your own book, is a fairly modern idea and fails to explain the totality of the world? You mentioned pan-gender landscapes at one point.
Right.
What is that challenge?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought this one up. And I also, kind of want to be careful and apologize if I don't mean to wax too, pedantic, too professor-like here. I'm trying not to go too far down that road, but just to explain things in straight communications here. So the answer to this question really it's operating on multiple levels. And so to unpack it a little, people commonly understand the word gender today as being synonymous with biological sex. We see this in the forms we fill out, and surveys we might take, and they ask for our gender, right? Where the options given are right, female or male, or maybe, the option prefer not to answer. But technically speaking, gender itself is a social construct. We've invented it. Just like race is a social construct. There's no actual biological justification for races. There's more genetic diversity, for example, in the continent of Africa than there is between Africans and people elsewhere in the world. So the idea of race is a social construct, gender is a social construct. what it constitutes beauty to some populations or another. Those are social constructs. So historically, then, and even still today, certain cultures recognize more than two genders, um, three or four, or as many as 9 different genders. Um, and genders here, we're talking about this in the sense that they are non-binary composites across a spectrum of feminine and masculine and non-gendered behavioral traits. A composite really, that are sometimes referred to as gender fluid or bigender or pangender, right? Or two-spirit, etc. Different combinations. So gender, psychosocial, sex is biological, female or male. However, just as an aside, even biological sex is not binary in the strictest sense. I mean, there's females and males, although each appears biologically across a wide spectrum, of what we consider a more, say, masculine male or maybe more feminine male, behaviorally or physically or what have you. More masculine female or feminine female, right? So there are certainly, there's a spectrum there. And in addition, as mentioned in my book, that the human genome broadly also includes an intersex population. People born intersex are between 1,000 people, or 1 in 2,000 people are intersex, who at birth have indeterminate or blended sexual anatomies. So there's quite the spectrum there. And then the terms then we use, woman and man, these are biocultural terms that combine biological sex terms, female, male, with socially constructed genders of feminine and masculine. So that's kind of a little of both, woman, man. Um, so that's gender. And as for archetypes, then these are fundamental. Archetypes are recurring images, patterns, themes that all of us have in our collective unconscious that represent basic human experiences and characteristics. Back in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, Carl Jung, analytical psychologist, proposed the idea of an anima, the feminine in men, and the animus, the masculine in women, as archetypal opposites that everybody carries. They kind of transcend biological sex. So gender archetypes then are these universal patterns, symbolic patterns that represent aspects of masculine, feminine energies. Kind of stem from Carl Jung's work, but other psychologists took up that torch along the way.
Sorry if I may interrupt real quick.
Yes,
So the
sorry.
archetypes would be what the common sense understands as characteristics for one or another.
Yes, yeah, they are universal, commonly understood patterns that exist, in our unconscious mind that vary a little bit, population to population, but generally speaking, we understand, in how they inform our stories. For example, like there's the maiden or the queen or the lover or the sage, the wild woman, the hero. All of these are archetypes that we usually have an immediate response to and understand.
That have been perpetuated for years in stories, and we'll talk about more the stories later.
Right.
But yes. So in a way, it makes it richer to use those archetypes because they might operate in the spectrum that you mentioned, but it's a way to help not personify, but make it more into the human language, something that we can understand a little bit better than the language of the geography, let's say, the
Absolutely,
landscape.
because they're symbolizing, yeah, the landscape itself, of course, can be a character in a story, and
Mhm.
it means certain things automatically. It reaches out and touches us. It symbolizes things immediately that don't even need to be, said, don't even need to be stated in the story. It's speaking on another level, a three-dimensional level for us
Mhm.
in that story.
When I was working on my master's dissertation, I used discourse analysis as the methodology for the humanities that I was researching. It wasn't communication, so hence discourse analysis. And
Yep.
instead of we could have used there are approaches that use archetypes, but in discourse analysis, we understand as everything is a big discourse, and some things are the mainstream discourse, and other things are countering that discourse. So when I was studying gender under that perspective, we would have to, and I use fairy tale characters so folks would
Mhm.
understand a little bit. And it was like, so when I'm talking about what people generally understand about witch, what people that generally understand about a fairy, what people generally understand about a princess, about a prince, these are the characteristics. And this is why I was working with children. So they were very fast to associate ideals to each
Mm,
one of those characters.
absolutely.
So yeah, it is a very helpful tool.
Very helpful, very powerful. Yeah, and it can be manipulated, of course.
Absolutely. Would you like to be one of the first to know about Lantern books, author events, and more? Then sign up for our newsletter. We deliver it only once a month, so you don't have to worry about overflowing your inbox with emails. We curate our newsletter with the latest Lantern news, but we also try to add information about partner organizations. That way, you can get to know about a new sanctuary or other activist organization every month. Go to the link on the episode description to know more. One of the terms that you bring in the book is the man the hunter. And I'm
Right.
not sure if you can consider that an archetype, but it is one of the many theories that explain. Um, some folks used to explain why we have the society that we have today, why people eat animals,
Mm,
specifically, why people try to oppress people that they believe are subhuman or they are less than.
mhm,
While I was reading, I was thinking, is there a relation between the man the hunter theories with the insecurity of patriarchal values? For example, something my mom said tells me ever since I can remember, motherhood is a certainty, paternity is a guess. Nowadays, we
mhm,
have
mhm,
DNA exams and stuff that kind of
mhm,
make
mhm,
that. But for most, as you mentioned in the book, for most of humanity's history, motherhood was obvious. Paternity, you have to trust the woman, whoever she says
mhm,
goes, or basic insecurities, such as the fact that without our tools and cooperative systems, humans are one of the weakest animals in the world without fangs or claws. We have to rely on one another, and we have to rely on our abilities of finding strategic ways out of
mhm.
problems. Would you say is there a relationship between man the hunter and the insecurity of those values?
Oh my, yes. Absolutely. And so this is operating again, operating on different levels here. Great question. Certainly, we talked about maternity, paternity. Also, it's a very well known fact how in cultures around the world and throughout history, there's a different cultural ceremonial, really. Um, uh, Avenue that's taken for women as they become women. Okay, they have their first menstrual period, and that's pretty definite. Everyone knows that's happened, and they're now women. For men, not so definite. Boys who are becoming men, and so in ceremonies and rituals around the world, traditionally especially, the boys, once they reach a certain age, undergo a rite that usually includes some kind of bloodletting. And that can mean circumcision at the age of 12, 13, 14, um, and or some kind of pain that's involved, some kind of rite that they have to go through, a gauntlet they have to walk in order to become recognized then as men. And much of that rite for boys, young men, is focused toward imitating the rights of women, girls becoming women, which happens to them not naturally and physically, but for boys, it's more cultural, and they have to impose this this right for them to survive and get through. And so there's certainly that aspect of it. That men are trying to make this more definite and reify this act. Also, I would say that yes, we are as humans slow and weak overall, um, relative to most other animals. We're as I mentioned in the book, we couldn't outrun a house cat. We, as you mentioned, don't have the claws, the sharp teeth, a lot of things that um, that it would help to have if you were, say, an actual predator in in nature. I would go from here to say then that it has been important strategically for humans to stick together and be communal and friendly, cooperative. um, and this is the strategy that humans followed as we evolved in Africa.
Mhm.
Um, so, although we are most often classed as omnivores, yes, so we do eat so many different things. It's my opinion and the opinion of many social scientists as well that it's more accurate to physically class humans as facultative herbivores. Facultative, facultative as it's used here means adaptive. Okay, referring to other foods that we can eat if we need to, opportunistically, but are not our primary food strategy. We evolved to eat things that didn't run away from us or bite back. That's what it comes down to. Although we're very, very adaptive and we can get by on lots of food items, getting nutrients from things that, yeah, absolutely, from meat, eggs, milk. Well, most of the time, only about 25-30% of the world's population doesn't have a problem with milk. Right. Um, and so even though we're often called omnivores because we can eat a wide range of food, even when they're not very good for us, um, it's more accurate to say that humans can exhibit omnivorous dietary habits, although our bodies overwhelmingly prefer plant foods because this reflects our physical evolution. The way that we're made. If you can move your jaw around in a circle, that means you're not a carnivore. That's our teeth are herbivore. Made for herbivore diets. Most of our gut and things like that. So as for that man the hunter trope, um, it's circulated a long time in pop culture, um, since the 19th century at least, but it got a great boost in the early 20th century, as I mentioned in my book, by French archaeologist Abbe Rule, who proposed a hunting magic idea. The hypothesis for what, inspired Paleolithic people to paint on cave walls, all of these animals. And, of course, that we have come to understand that most of those animal bones never occur. in the trash piles associated with Paleolithic peoples. Most of those animals represent, again, rites of passage, fertility, rituals, imitating the strength or the speed of this animal or that. More importantly, people like Raymond Dart, the anatomist I mentioned, who worked in South Africa in the early 20th century. He had been a medic in World War I. He saw the barbarity of humanity, and when miners from a nearby mine there in South Africa sent him the skeleton of what they thought was a baboon, he determined that it was an Australopithecine and an early pre-human. And the miners also sent him these stone tools, and he interpreted them as weapons that pre-humans killed each other with or killed animals with, and were violent, and that's in our nature. And he came up with this whole killer ape idea. And it's interesting that that information inspired the writer Robert Ardrey in the mid-20th century to write African Genesis. He also wrote articles about human killer apes in Playboy magazine. And that then, in turn, inspired Stanley Kubrick to create his film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. In the first, 15 or 20 minutes of that film, of course, you may remember, you've got the early pre-humans, maybe Australopithecines, who are fighting with each other over scarce resources and killing each other, and that expanded, built on the whole killer ape myth. None of this is true. Australopithecines, for example, were entirely, vegans, essentially. The calculus, the tartar on their teeth, has been tested. It's all plant foods. That's where we come from, and that's the kind of diet that we come from. Now, coming into today, and I'm sorry, stop me if I'm talking too long here.
Please go ahead.
But hunting and such things today, hunters who live in today's modern developed nations, it's often been said that hunting serves these two psychological reasons. First, hunters subconsciously believe that they're going to appropriate animals' power when they kill and perhaps consume an animal. Or even if it doesn't have to be hunter, it can be, buying it off the shelf at the grocery store, lots and lots of, steaks and meat and that sort of thing. They're going to consume that and gain that power. And what does that do? That psychologically, subconsciously, assuages their own masculine insecurity, makes them feel tougher, right? As I mentioned in my book, manly men eat meat and control women. And, there are parallels there, of course. For hunters, that power that they get is extended when they display those the trophies, on the walls and all that sort of thing. So yeah, and I would call this, as I do in the book, hypermasculine. And patriarchy are by nature then insecure. They always constantly have to remake themselves, refortify themselves, and show that they're not inadequate and vulnerable.
At Lantern Publishing and Media, we love working with authors who are deeply aligned with causes that matter. Many of them are passionate about animals. One of those authors is Cheryl Moss. Lantern is proud to have published 3 of Cheryl's children's books, Gabriel, Cluck, and Pickle. Each story highlights an animal who escaped factory farming and found safety and care at a sanctuary. Cheryl is committed to shining a spotlight on the plight of animals. Not only does she do that by writing her books and sharing her books, she also does it as the host of the Better Life for Animals podcast. If you care about animals and want to hear real stories from sanctuary founders, team members, board members, and volunteers, be sure to tune in. Several Lantern authors have been on the show, so you might encounter some familiar voices out there. Visit betterlifeforanimals.com/podcast to start listening. Again, that's betterlifeforanimals.com/podcast. But you were talking about how the myth of the man the hunter and how people believe for many years that humans were inherently violent. And I've seen, again, because of my master's dissertation was focused on children, I've seen people use children as examples saying, oh, they're hitting their parents. You have to teach them that it's wrong to hit their parents. You have to teach them that it's wrong to steal a colleague's snack, a friend's snack in the playground. You have to teach them not to push other children or their brothers and sisters because they're jealous. But we don't talk much about how kids usually spontaneously bring toys to share. How there are videos everywhere on social media with people loving it, like little children thinking they have to share everything. So I've seen one the other day of a little toddler. He recently learned the idea of sharing, and he was saying the word share all the time and just giving a piece of whatever snack he had in his hand and giving to his mom and back to him and so on, like one bite each, because everything needs to be shared. Or how they embrace friends of all races and social realities, how we have almost to be taught what racism is, what discrimination is, because as children, it's just a friend, come play. So why don't we see all that and say, no, we are inherently good?
Great question. I love this question. Well, and remember too, I mean, of course, we have all of these capacities for things. That's who we are. Are we violent from the outset? No, but we certainly have a capacity for it. Look around, right? In my book, on this point, I describe how humans are primarily a cultural species, and we may want to unpack this a little bit more too. As anthropologists will say, even we do what comes culturally, right? This is apparent in how readily we're primed to be socialized in the world that we're born into from day one, if not before.
Sorry, we do what comes culturally, not what comes naturally.
Right, we do what comes culturally.
Yes.
So, and we're expected to behave in certain ways. We have gender roles. I mentioned a little example in my book of a study, and there's a lot of debate around this. Don't get me wrong, but the study that I did mention is of the little boys, infants that are held, boys and girls, and the little boys don't smile as much. They don't smile as much as the little girl babies that are held. And what the researchers observed is that the people holding the little girls tended to smile more, tickle more the little girls because, girls are made sugar and spice and everything nice. And that's what they're expecting that from the little baby. The little boys, puppy dog tails and all that, they're expected to be a gender role already, are exhibiting a gender role. And so even by day one, they're already babies are imitating what they see around them. And this is part of that socialization process, that they're expected to behave a certain way. And so, a few years later, you're going to have one has bow and arrow and a toy gun. The other one's going to have an easy bake oven, right? And that's, again, just reinforcing that right along the way. By the time we're 3 years old, certainly most of the foundation for the way that we're going to view the world is in place. And we've been absorbing all that, from the people around us, from television, everything we see. It's being absorbed very, very early on. And this includes the development of our ego self, which means separateness and hierarchy and how things are arranged hierarchically. Well, yeah, and when small children are violent, certainly they're violent. They can be frustrated. They might be stressed or hungry or overstimulated, whatever, and that's can be a temporary way for them to express strong emotions or test their boundaries, their ego boundaries that they're developing. And of course, there can also be deeper problems like abuse and neglect and other issues. But certainly by age 5, 90% of our foundational worldview is in place by the time we're 5 years old. And by the time we're 10, it's set. You know, we are the people we're going to be. We can undo that with effort and intention, but the content, the mental content, is in place by age 10.
Yes.
We don't hear as often about kids sharing or making friends because it's at least what I've seen, it's more ordinary behaviors, and we're definitely going to notice that they're beating up on each other or throwing something. Yeah, we're going to notice that more quickly. Although sad or heartbreaking studies, maybe you've heard of, Louisa, that show how small children, ages 3, 4, 5, already show racial bias. And it's the black doll, white doll studies, and they're already favoring the lighter skinned dolls. Or the black child says, "Oh yeah, I want to be like this white doll." That's the better one. They're already showing that by what they've learned and absorbed around them.
Exactly. And that actually was what sparked my interest in researching children's discourse on media when I was in my master's program. And it was because I used to be a ballet teacher for little kids, ages 3 to 5. And I had a student who was she was my student for 3 years, so 3, 4, and 5 years old. By the time she was 5 years old, we used to give them out stickers just as something fun for them to take home after a fun ballet class. And we had usually stickers that were little ballerinas. And the stickers were very diverse, and we just distributed them at random. Every time that she would get a black ballerina, she would tear it off. She would scream that she hated black people in general. She would display behaviors that my brain would not find compatible with a 5-year-old. So I knew her mother, I knew her family. I was like, they're not like this. At least they didn't seem to be like this when they came to pick her up at school and we had the chat outside. So I was very curious, including like part of her family was immigrants. So like part of her family knew what it felt like to be othered. So I was like, what is going on in this little girl's head? And I went to study, and what I did end up seeing in case of race specifically is sometimes the parents think it's better to say nothing because the kids why contaminate their little brains with ideas like that? Let's just say nothing and assume that all is fine. But when they stop at the traffic light and they see somebody, usually a person of color, coming to sell candy or to beg for money, because unfortunately, usually it's people of color who are in positions such as those, they put the window up. Or the fact that there are like 2 students that are not white in her school, or the fact that she doesn't in her social circles, she doesn't see people who do not look white, who do not look like her, or the dolls, or the Disney princesses, or whatever the things that she likes and consume in media. She only sees a certain narrative, so she starts internalizing that other must be wrong. And the same happens with gender. By
Of course, and it's
by age 5, they're gender police. They're the gender police. They know how to police
absolutely, yeah.
in a way that is scary. And it's funny though, because usually children that young, they believe that gender is more performative than it is any other sort of social construct. So it's also, because it's performative, it's also temporary. So there was a little boy who loved to come and watch the ballet classes, and that kid wanted to join in. I could see it in his eyes. but his parents wouldn't allow him. So all he could do was sit down and watch the class.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the other boys started calling him a girl because
Mm-hmm.
he was watching ballet class. The moment that he stopped and went to play ball with the other boys, he was
Mm-hmm.
a boy. But when he was watching, he was a girl. So it was temporary because of the characteristics they were associating with this. So all that to say,
So interesting.
all that
Mm.
to say that things are interconnected. There's an intersectionality aspect of everything we're saying. So all those forms of oppression, they intersect. We cannot analyze them isolated.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, and it reminds me, I recall being probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years old, wanting to learn to dance. I wanted to be a dancer, and I told my mom, and but my dad would not have it. No, little Billy is not going to be a dancer. And so that did not happen. What was allowed was, okay, he can start to take piano lessons, fine, because there are, these country music, musicians men who are, um, pianists, so that's okay. But they were not going to let me, dance. So, pace
Eh,
the rock.
which reinforces like so many sad ideas. And during the work that I did with the kids, I ended up finding out there was also a social economical aspect in it. So kids who were predominantly from families of higher income, they were, especially the boys, they did not want to discuss anything that wasn't masculine in their view. The children that were from lower social incomes, even though they looked more like they were stuck in their own ends of gender. So girls only want to talk about girl things and boys only want to talk about boy things that they consider to be girl and boy things. The moment that they sat down to talk, they were able to listen to each other.
Mm,
And
mhm.
at the end of the activities that we held with the two separate groups, the lower income children were the ones who came up with collective ideas on how to disrupt those patterns.
Mhm. Fascinating. Mhm.
It's very interesting how they were. I don't know why. My research had to stop because it was a master's, not a doctorate. But
Sure, right.
um, it made me curious to see why is there that social economical component in the way that they perceive collectiveness.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but that's the reason why I think the whole point with this stories is just to connect with the fact that we are more connected in the different sorts of oppression that we perpetuate and we feel than we think. If you think back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, etc., they would study sciences as a whole, music and math and
Sure. Yeah,
the sky, and it
absolutely.
was all in one thing.
It was all called geography.
Yeah, exactly.
Lantern Publishing and Media is a book publisher devoted to animal rights. You can keep up with all the news about our latest books, get tips on veganism, inspirational quotes, and much more by following us on social media. We are at Lantern PM on Instagram and Blue Sky, at Lantern PM Official on TikTok, and Lantern Publishing and Media on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Consider giving us a follow if you are on any of the social media channels. It really helps us grow our community and reach more people, sharing your message with the world. All the links are on the episode description.
We were sharing stories and talking about stories, and every chapter of your book begins with a story.
Mhm.
Stories, as you mentioned in the book, can serve as an instrument of maintaining the norms. You bring some very traditional tales there. Rapunzel. There is I forgot the Smith and the Devil. I think there's a
Yeah, yep.
yeah,
Smith and the Devil, Pandora's Box, the
Pandora's.
Lorax.
Exactly. Tales are a part of our, like, everybody knows them pretty much. And if they don't, they heard a version of it. I never heard the version that you wrote down, the Smith and the Devil, but I've heard
Yeah,
another one that it was just the same, like different characters, same idea.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so do stories also have the power to question the status quo, do you think?
Hmm. Absolutely. Great question again. And I think, yes, stories function in both ways. Stories certainly help to teach values, preserve cultures, build the community, shape identity, right? And help make our world relatable, and we all have buy-in. We know where we're going together. Um, However, as environments do change, cultures change, things happen, then so must the stories. They need to adapt um, and rebuild themselves to and adjust to that. Oftentimes unintentionally, it happens organically like that. But of course, there's also intentional, like how we want to change this to have this outcome. And so yeah, I think stories can drive social change for both good and ill by transmitting new information and rewriting histories. I also bring up at the very end of the book that little um, real life story of students at Duke University, right? Who um, maybe were first generation folks like myself going to college. They didn't think, oh, I'm not cut out for this. My GPA is sinking. I don't belong here. And student services, that was the story that they'd been told and that they believed. Student services reached out to them and said, hey, look, you just need more time. We need to do A, B, and C. And let's just take our time and see how it goes. And over time, their GPAs came up when they believed that, hey, that's all I need. I'm just coming from a different place. I have a different way of learning, a different requirement, a different mode that I require, and that was their new story. So yes, they told themselves a new story that they believed, and it worked.
Mhm.
And they did well. I think also, we see sometimes in recent times how uh, federal funding is being cut and prescriptions set, for eliminating factual history, say, of slavery, racism, discrimination that's occurred in this country. So we are intentionally, some of us are intentionally changing those stories to support a certain ideology
Mhm.
um, in this part of the world.
Mhm.
So yeah, both ways. Stories preserve culture, and definitely they can be rewritten for all sorts of purposes.
I may be going too out of the box here, but it got me thinking that we were talking in the beginning of the book, we were talking about landscapes, we were talking about geography, we were talking about being more in close contact to the natural environment than we are right now. We, in general, if you live in a big city, like in New York, for example, you're not as in touch with the natural environment as you would be 10,000 years ago. So I am wondering, and especially being somebody from the global south, being from Brazil and living here, I wonder how much will change about our societies having access to resources now that it doesn't depend so much as being close or further away from the equator, but it depends more on climate
Mhm,
change. It depends more
mhm.
on economical access to resources and whether or not you can get food that it's not basically just toxic waste and things like that. So I
Mm,
wonder, do you think it will change in the future?
absolutely, and I think they have changed. Stories are changing, have changed. Um, yes, we'll always have the Grimm's brothers fairy tales and all, that sort of thing that will come down to us. And maybe those will be updated a little bit, as Walt Disney determines they need to be. But but otherwise, I think, yes, we're telling ourselves new stories all the time in TV shows and movies that come out. And I'm glad you brought this up because recently, I've noticed, perhaps you have too, Louisa, how in the last, oh, I don't know, 5, 10 years maybe, how vegans and veganism is kind of a punching bag joke for people online, right? Oh, that's the vegan, that are doing A, B, and C. So, or eating these things. Um, However, just recently, I was watching um, Emily in Paris.
Yes.
Right? And 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 vegan food came up and say, at the restaurant that they were at and vegan, and it was all fine. It was all okay. We're going to, that's what they want. That's who they are. We're on board. No punchline was delivered. It was okay. Um,
And when you
Another one,
talk about
one that
Emily in Paris, that is saying a lot.
yeah. Um, and yeah, and so another one I was watching recently, season 10 of Queer Eye just came out, right? I don't
I'm
know
on
if you've
episode 1, careful with spoilers.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, I won't no spoilers. It's an incredible. I love that show.
Mhm.
But, I think it's actually episode 2 that, uh, the people involved are vegans. And, of course, they work around that. They do great things with that in the kitchen
Mhm.
on the show Queer Eye. And it's not a punchline. It's like, right on.
Mhm.
And so stories are being rewritten is what I'm getting back to, and things are changing, you know?
And and that's great because you kind of anticipated my last, second to last question, which is the last chapter of your book talks about
Yeah,
the now, the challenges and reasons to be hopeful. I wanna know what inspires you to stay optimistic about a better world?
yeah, well, yeah, it was a good segue then, I guess. Um, certainly changes like that. I'm reminded of, um, Martin Luther King Jr.'s, famous quote, about how things are changing racism and how he remarked that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And so, yeah, it's long. There are lots, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but things are absolutely changing. And I allude to that too in the last chapter of my book with Roderick Nash's uh, that little figure showing how property rights came first to white men, and then there were, property rights to other people. There was emancipation. And all of these slow improvements over the centuries that have been moving in that direction. Um, I I think that's a hope for me for sure. Seeing that arc of
Your picture.
that's one hope, right? Arc of the moral universe. Forward and backward, no doubt, but mostly forward. The other hope that I have is, I reflected on this looking back how I was a fan of science fiction when I was growing up, and I read a lot of books, saw, Star Trek, Star Wars, whatever. Um, I was a fan, for a while of Isaac Asimov, right? Isaac Asimov, the author who wrote, the Foundation series, Nightfall was a favorite of mine.
Mhm.
At one point, in the Foundation, series, the character says, "Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent." And so certainly we see a rise, in violence in the world, boom, boom, ebbs and flows, but that's certainly recently a rise in violence in the world. And, one of the central causes of violence is anger. Causes of anger is fear, and fear is a response to threats, existential threat. So, although it may sound counterintuitive, with the escalation of wars and terrorism, brutality against people and non-human animals, um, and all of these injustices, these are, in my opinion, symptoms of the hypermasculine paradigm that senses threat. It senses threats posed by humanity's, ancient predilection for peace and kindness and care and things like Queer Eye. So all of it together. And so it's sensing that threat, and it's definitely fighting back. It's going to hold on with all its worth for its power. And so that is telling me that certainly that there is this groundswell of humanity that is forcing the hypermasculine's hand, you might say.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Bill, before I let you go, is there anything you would like to share with our listeners? Any projects, upcoming events, anything in the next few months?
I have been working on several projects right now related to my book. I've been designing a college course at 2 different colleges that's called Geo 2009, Social Geography of Inequality. And I'll be using The Red Planet as one of the textbooks. So
Nice.
that will come into play hopefully by this fall. It's scheduled to run this fall.
Mm-hmm.
That is certainly one thing. And then I will be presenting data that I get from running that class at the next year's annual meeting for the American Association of Geographers. And so Red Planet will be part of that
That's awesome.
presentation.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is to everyone that I was awarded a finalist in the National Indie Excellence Awards for the Red Planet. It was judged a finalist in the category social political change. So,
And congratulations for that too.
thank you.
All right. I will let you go now because we're way past of our time. Well, so thank you once again for being here with us today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Louisa.
This was our episode with author Bill Hatcher talking about his latest book, The Red Planet. I love having the opportunity to chat with Bill, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as well. Now, as promised, here's a special discount coupon just for you. If you want to read The Red Planet or any of the books ever featured here on Lantern Voices on an ebook, then you can go over to lanternpm.org, click on our ebook store, and then click on Featured in our podcast. Over there, you'll find all the books that were featured either on Season 1 or now in Season 2 here on Lantern Voices. Select as many as you want, head over to checkout, and on the coupon space that you have right under the price over there, you can type Lantern Voices 25. That is Lantern Voices, like the podcast name, and the numbers 2 and 5 all together. Don't put any spaces in there. And that will give you 25% off your purchase of any ebook ever featured here on the podcast. Last thing before I let you go, we are trying to grow our Patreon community of supporters this year. We have some nice perks for anyone who sponsors us with $20 or more per month, but you can sponsor us from just $5 a month, and it already makes a whole world of difference. Lantern Publishing and Media is a nonprofit book publisher. We believe in bringing books about compassion, about animal rights, social justice, and many other values that the world desperately needs right now. If you can't help us sponsoring us on Patreon, just head over to our social media, comment here below on the podcast, help us spread our message to more people. It's okay, we understand not everybody can help financially, but for those of you who can, and if you want any extra perks for doing so, then head over to Patreon and check the tiers, check the possibilities. We would love to count you as one of our supporters. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And we'll talk again next month when a brand new guest will be here on this podcast. Do you have any ideas who they might be? I'll see you there, and take care. Goodbye.